A year and a half ago, a young innovator who was one of the most promising activists on open technology and internet freedom and a brilliant programmer named Aaron Swartz was found dead in his apartment. He was the co founder of websites like Reddit and of ideas like the Creative Commons. Aaron Swartz was a child prodigy who learned very early on that he did not like the corporate culture infusing the internet and wanted to be part of the movement keeping the internet open and freely available to the public. He helped to launch groups like Demand Progress and the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, one of the groups that helped to elect Senator Elizabeth Warren. But Aaron Swartz was arrested 2 years before his death by police on the campus of MIT and charged with illegally downloading materials from a database called JSTOR. This eventually led to a number of serious charges against him, including violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. If convicted, he would have faced $1 million in fines and a possible 35-year prison sentence. Now there's a documentary about Aaron Swartz and the ideas that motivated him. It's called The Internet's Own Boy, The Story of Aaron Swartz. In just a minute, we'll be joined by filmmaker Brian Knappenberger, whose earlier film was We Are Legion, The Story of the Hacktivists. Here are the opening minutes of the documentary The Internet's Own Boy.
A co-founder of the social news and entertainment website Reddit has been found dead.
He certainly was a prodigy, although he never kind of thought of himself like that.
He was totally unexcited about starting businesses and making money.
There's a profound sense of loss tonight in Highland Park, Aaron Swartz's hometown, as loved ones say goodbye to one of the internet's brightest lights.
Open access and computer activists are mourning his loss.
An astonishing intellect. You talk to people who knew him. He was killed by the government, and MIT betrayed all of its basic principles.
They wanted to make an example out of him, okay?
Governments have an insatiable desire to control.
He was potentially facing 35 years in prison and a $1 million fine.
And those are the opening minutes of the documentary, The Internet's Own Boy, The Story of Aaron Swartz. Filmmaker Brian Knappenberger now joins me in studio. Welcome to Uprising.
Thank you for having me.
You spoke in this documentary to people who knew Aaron Swartz intimately and thus sort of painted a portrait of this young man. But did you ever meet him yourself?
I did not, no. While I was making my previous film, We Are Legion, The Story of the Hacktivists, I was certainly following lots of quote-unquote hacker stories, particularly people who had kind of run afoul of the law. And so I was very much aware of Aaron's story. I remember when he was first arrested and I was following his case. It was striking to me, though, at the time that not many people really knew about his case or who he was until after he died, in pretty stark contrast to a lot of other hacker stories that get more press. And I realized that when I was making the documentary, frankly, that was because he was actively trying to keep it quiet. He wasn't talking even to his close friends about it. He thought they might be exposed to this kind of vicious prosecutor that was after him. He didn't want to bring them into this legal nightmare he was in. And every time he tried to get any kind of public support for his case, the prosecutor kind of redoubled their efforts. So it was actually kind of kept quiet for this kind of 2-year period in which he was experiencing the difficulties.
So who exactly was Aaron Swartz and what motivated him? Let's talk about this young man. You painted a portrait of him, even with home videos of him as a little baby, you know, as a
exactly.
2- and 3-year-old.
And of course, on the computer, too.
Yeah, and of course, watching a film like this, when you see a person as they are so little and so innocent and a child who's so precocious and so curious, it makes the tragedy all the more stark. Why was it important for you to show that part of Aaron, going back to when he was 2 and 3 years old?
Well, because I think that's a really interesting part of his life and and his story. I mean, he took to the internet right away. He was in a family of people that was deeply involved in programming, and his dad was a consultant involved with operating systems and things like that.
So he was exposed to that early on.
He was exposed to it really early on, and not only exposed to it, he took to it really. You know, he was a kind of a programming prodigy. There's a funny part in the film where he's working with these RSS working groups, right, across the internet, and he's being this kind of substantive contributor to it.
And he helped to develop RSS, or really, he thought about this very early on. RSS is really simple syndication. It's something that, people, I've used it when people who created podcasts.
Yeah, your show probably uses it in some way. Yeah, so absolutely, yeah, it's critical for this kind of free flow of information on the internet. And he's a substantive contributor to this, and he's working with these people in their 30s and 40s and 50s.
And it's all remotely done over the online.
Online in these kind of chat groups, and these are internet dignitary luminaries, big names of the internet. And at one point they say, well, look, we'd love to have you come out to one of these face-to-face meetings and just meet with us and talk about these RSS standards. And he says, I'm not sure my mom would let me. I'm only 13. I have to get her permission first.
And they were pretty shocked at
that.
Yeah,
not only shocked, but then, of course, they wanted to meet him even more.
Let's talk a little bit about his then eventual move to Silicon Valley and his connection with Reddit, which is, again, a website that now people use on a daily basis. This is something that we take for granted. He found himself part of the Silicon Valley culture, and he didn't like it.
That's right. I mean, basically, he was a co-founder of Reddit, which is now one of the biggest social news site on the internet. And he sold Reddit to Condé Nast. They sold Condé Nast, and that's
a huge magazine company.
Yeah, major company, and that made him a very, very rich 19-year-old. But he takes a pretty decisive turn at that point in his life, where away from this kind of Silicon Valley startup treadmill. I mean, I think he saw Silicon Valley as a kind of machine for making money.
And at this point in his life, he could have easily sort of followed the path that like Mark Zuckerberg did.
Oh, no doubt. I think anybody looking at his story could see that this is somebody that could have made millions and millions of dollars and kept going, kept on this kind of build to flip Silicon Valley culture. But no, he doesn't. He turns towards political organizing, towards social justice issues. He sort of stays away from that. I mean, I think he saw, Silicon Valley now, there's this kind of cliche, like we're making the world a better place, right? Well,
but really, that's a nice way of saying we want to make our lives better by making lots of money.
Right, make our bank accounts a better place. Yeah. I think that what he did is he started asking the question, well, what makes the world bad? What do you think makes the world bad? And then how do you create something, an action that targets that specific thing that you think is wrong? And then how do you measure it? Measure the effect that you've had so that you can tweak your approach and be better next time. I mean, the minute you have that kind of intellectual curiosity about making the world a better place, you've ripped the veil from the Silicon Valley nonsense.
So he had this very strong idea about information being accessible to all. And this leads to then why he did what he did and came under the scrutiny that he did, then the legal prosecution. He wanted to free information, especially information that government money was used to create, where public subsidies were used to create a public database of knowledge. But of course, information today is not free, even when our own tax dollars have been used to create it.
That's exactly right. We have this very strange sort of system in this country where academic researchers and instructors, they do this kind of research, and some of it's taxpayer funded, and it is basically the copyright. They hand over this copyright to these big corporations like JSTOR or Reed Elsevier. JSTOR is not even the worst offender. And then the universities have to then pay these companies to subscribe to these journals. And if you wanted to, if you're outside of a university or, setting and you want to buy these articles, sometimes it's $50, $60, $70 a pop. I mean, if you're doing anything substantive, you can rack up the bill pretty quick.
I love how your documentary actually went into this. I think it explains it really well. So let's take a listen to another clip from the film, The Internet's Own Boy, The Story of Aaron Swartz.
Pretty much every major university in the United States pays these sort of licensing fees to organizations like JSTOR and Thompson and ISI to get access to scholarly journals that the rest of the world can't read.
These scholarly journals and articles are essentially the entire wealth of human knowledge online, and many have been paid for with taxpayer money or with government grants. But to read them, you often have to pay again, handing over steep fees to publishers like Reed Elsevier.
These licensing fees are so substantial that people who are studying in India instead of studying in the United States don't have this kind of access. They're locked out from all of these journals. They're locked out from our entire scientific legacy. I mean, a lot of these journal articles, they go back to the Enlightenment. Every time someone has written down a scientific paper, it's been scanned and digitized and put in these collections. That is a legacy that has been brought to us by the history of people doing interesting work, the history of scientists. It's a legacy that should belong to us as a commons, as a people, but instead it's been locked up and put online by a handful of for-profit corporations who then try and get the maximum profit they can out of it.
So a researcher paid by the university or the people publishes a paper, and in the very, very last step of that process, after all the work is done, after all the original research is done, the thinking, the lab work, the analysis, after everything is done, then the researcher has to hand over his or her copyright to this multi-billion-dollar company. And it's sick. It's an entire economy built on volunteer labor. And then the publishers sit at the very top and scrape off the cream.
Talk about a scam. One publisher in Britain made a profit of $3 billion last year. I mean, what a racket.
And it was a racket. It still is a racket.
Yeah.
Aaron Swartz took a very dim view of this racket. We heard his voice, the sort of sounded like a video chat interview that he was giving about this issue.
Yeah,
and
a speech at the University of Illinois, actually. Yeah.
So he took this very, very seriously. Tell us what exactly he did.
Right. So I should maybe preface this by saying that we don't actually know why he downloaded the articles.
And his motivations become important in the legal case.
Incredibly important, and a real problem for the prosecutors, actually, the intent. He was arrested before he did anything, but essentially what he did was he went on the MIT campus, which is famously open and famously fast. You could go on it. You don't have to be a student there. And from MIT, he had direct access to the riches of JSTOR. He had direct
access
access
to this database, one of these
databases. Yeah. And so what he does is that he starts downloading these articles, and he ends up downloading 4.7 million academic journal articles. And MIT and JSTOR database take various steps in order to kick him off the network and in order to stop this activity. He's obviously a very skilled computer, quote-unquote, hacker. He easily routes around their efforts to stop him. And he ultimately plugs directly into the network in a closet in the basement of MIT. When the authorities find out that there's a computer down there, they don't stop the downloads. They create a kind of, I guess you call it, sting of some sort. They keep it going. They put surveillance cameras in. You see this in their film.
And you got access to this footage which you put in your film.
That's right.
It's amazing.
So you see, so they create this kind of sting, and he comes in, at one point, and they basically get him, and they arrest him, put him in solitary confinement. This is before he does anything with these 4.7 million journal articles. So while you can look at for instance, the clip you just played, the speech he gave at the University of Illinois, and other writings and stuff that he did, you see he was obviously concerned about this access, this walling up of the world's knowledge and sort of this treasure of
that's
the
already been
great
paid
minds.
for once.
Yeah,
and now corporations simply put up a paywall and try to get
exactly
more
right.
money.
Yeah, these are the great minds of our moment, dealing with the big issues of our moment, which is important, and that it's not accessible around the world, that it's only accessible to a handful of people is upset. But there's other potential, I think, with reasons he may have been doing this.
So it wasn't just MIT that went after him. Immediately, it was the government.
Mm-hmm.
It was federal authorities. This is where it got serious. This is where suddenly he was facing these charges. Why did the government go after him? In the clip that I played near the beginning of our interview, there was one person who said he was killed by the government, even though he was found in his apartment.
Yeah, that's actually Aaron's father says that. I don't think. I don't think he means that literally.
Yeah.
But he is. Why does the government go after him? It does escalate really quickly. MIT sort of police notify the Cambridge police, and this kind of rises up the chain of until it gets to the Secret Service, which actually deals with computer crime. A lot of people don't realize that in this country. A lot of it goes to the level of the Secret Service. Secret Service has these groups called electronic crimes task forces, which comes out of essentially were created in the Patriot Act at the beginning.
Under the Bush administration after 9/11.
Yeah, as a way of dealing with, we play clips on how this all came about, new threats.
But really what they're concerned about is somebody undermining the monetization of information, right? I mean, they're concerned about theft.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. Yeah, it's hard. We the truth is the government didn't talk to us on the film, and they told, and it's very puzzling. I wish they did. I would put their perspective just completely and, played it straight into the film. I wish we knew. They told Aaron's dad that they wanted to make an example out of Aaron, that they needed a case for deterrence. And, I think making an example, a case for deterrence, is a way of communicating something to a community, right? That's what it is. It's putting a hand at the stake at the front of the gates and saying, don't go here. So the fact that they haven't really told us what this was all about is puzzling.
You made this film very quickly, I'm assuming. He died in January 2013. A year and a half later, your film is opening in theaters around the country. I should mention it opens today, June 26th, at the Sundance Cinemas in West Hollywood in Los Angeles, June 27th at the Laemmle Playhouse 7 in Pasadena, July 4th at the Roxy Theater in San Francisco, also at the Blue Light Cinemas in Cupertino on July 4th. So this was a fast turnaround. How important is this story, you think? I mean, this ultimately is a tragedy.
Yeah, it is a tragedy. It is a tragedy, but the sort of things that Aaron was fighting for and the way he was so far ahead of everybody else, I think, and at least in some of these issues, that's not a very comfortable place to be. But I do think that his story basically asks the question, like, what kind of internet do we want now? Do we want an internet that's a tool for government to surveil us, or for corporations to extract private details from us, to sell us things, for do we want an internet where corporations decide the speed in the net neutrality debate?
And he was very much involved in the fight to stop the Stop Online Piracy Act around the NDAA, indefinite detention issue. I mean, so this was a person who was a staunch progressive activist and also happened to be a brilliant internet innovator.
Yeah, I think so. And he clearly saw both sides. I mean, do we want the internet that oppressive regimes use to squash dissidents, or do we want to be a tool to claw ourselves back from those oppressive regimes?
Well, Brian Knappenberger, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Is there a website for the documentary that listeners can find out more?
It is takepart.com/Internet's Own Boy.
Takepart.com/Internet's Own Boy. The name of the documentary is The Internet's Own Boy, the story of Aaron Swartz. Brian Knappenberger, filmmaker, thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck to you.
Thank you very much for having me.